All right, everyone, get ready. Because today we're tackling some seriously tough concepts, the kind that'll make or break you on that CCSP exam.
Yeah.
Cloud security, it's a wild ride, but we're here to be your guides.
Absolutely. And it's not about just memorizing terms. It's about
Yeah.
really understanding the why behind all the security stuff,
Yeah.
applying those concepts in real world scenarios.
Yeah, totally. So let's kick things off with risk treatment options, the building blocks.
Right.
We know risks are everywhere, especially in a cloud. But the question is, what do you actually do about them?
Well, you've got your four main options: avoidance, transference, mitigation, and acceptance.
Yeah.
But here's where things get interesting in the cloud world. Let's take transference, for example.
You know.
You usually think of insurance, right?
Yeah.
Classic example. But with cloud stuff, it's not always that simple.
You're right. That shared responsibility model, it throws a wrench in things, doesn't it?
It does.
You depend on the cloud provider for some security aspects, but you can't just hand over the reins completely, right?
Exactly. It's shared, but that doesn't mean it's an even split. You have to know where your part ends and theirs begins.
Right.
And that's where transference gets tricky.
So it's not as simple as just buying a cyber insurance policy and calling it a day.
Oh,
You really have to figure out what risks you can truly offload and what you have to manage yourself.
exactly. And that evaluation, it should factor in your organization's risk appetite and risk profile. It's kind of like a fingerprint. Each one is unique.
Okay, risk appetite sounds like something you'd order at a fancy restaurant.
Right. Mm,
But here, we're talking about how much risk a company is willing to accept, right?
Perfect analogy. Some organizations, especially those in highly regulated industries, have very little tolerance.
Ah,
Others, like startups or those in fast-changing markets, might be more okay with certain risks if it means they can innovate and grow faster.
it's like some people love roller coasters, others prefer a nice walk in the park. There's no right or wrong. It's about finding what works for your organization.
Right.
And once you know your risk appetite and the specific risks you're facing, then you can start figuring out how to actually reduce them.
And that's where security controls come in. Think of them as the tools in your toolbox, the layers of protection for your cloud environment.
Like building a fortress around your data.
Yes.
But instead of moats and drawbridges, we've got firewalls and intrusion detection systems. So let's break down these security controls. What are the main types?
Well, we can categorize them by their purpose: preventative, detective, and corrective.
Okay.
Preventive, as the name suggests, are there to stop attacks before they even happen. Your first line of defense.
So strong passwords, multi-factor authentication, network segmentation, those all fall under preventive.
Exactly. Make it as tough as possible for attackers to get in.
Got it. What about detective controls? Those sound more like, well, like a detective trying to catch the bad guys red-handed.
That's a great way to think about it. They're all about visibility. Not preventing attacks, but spotting suspicious activity quickly.
Okay.
So things like SIEM tools, intrusion detection systems, log analysis.
So these tools are constantly watching your environment, looking for anything out of the ordinary that could signal an attack is happening.
Exactly. They're your eyes and ears in the cloud, alerting you so you can act before any real damage is done.
And then we have corrective controls. These are the ones that come into play after an incident, right? Like a cleanup crew coming in to assess the damage and get things back to normal.
That's a great analogy.
But-
It's about minimizing the impact of a security breach and restoring normal operations. ASA. Things like incident response plans, disaster recovery procedures, or even just patching a vulnerability that was exploited.
So it's not enough to just try to prevent and detect threats. You got to have a plan for dealing with those inevitable breaches.
Yes.
It's like having a fire extinguisher ready just in case that smoke alarm goes off.
And that brings us to the concept of defense in depth.
No.
You can't rely on just one type of control. You need multiple layers, all working together to really make your security posture strong.
Gotcha. It's like having security guard at the gate, motion sensors around the property, and security cameras inside.
Yeah.
Each layer adds more protection,
Mhm.
making it that much harder for attackers to succeed.
Absolutely. And it's not just layering different types, but also different categories.
Right.
We've talked about purpose, but we can also categorize by how they work: technical, operational, and managerial.
Okay, this is where I sometimes get tripped up. What's the key difference?
Think about it this way. Technical controls, that's the actual technology doing the work.
Mm-hmm.
Firewalls, encryption, intrusion prevention systems, and so on.
Okay.
Operational controls are the processes and procedures we set up to manage that technology securely.
Okay.
Like access reviews, vulnerability management, incident response plans.
So technical is the tech itself, and operational is how we use and manage it effectively.
What about managerial controls? Those sound, well, more high level.
They are. Managerial controls are all about the big picture,
Okay,
the strategies and frameworks that guide our overall security efforts.
gotcha.
Think risk assessments, security policies, compliance audits, and security awareness training.
So it's the foundation, the blueprint for a secure cloud environment.
Exactly. And all three types need to work together seamlessly for effective security. You can have the fanciest tech in the world, but if your processes are weak or your policies are outdated, you're still vulnerable.
That's like having a state-of-the-art security system, but leaving the back door wide open.
Exactly.
All that fancy tech won't do much if you're not paying attention to the basics.
It's about a holistic approach, understanding that technology, people, and processes are all connected and all equally important. Okay, so we've covered a lot on security controls, the different types, categories, that layered approach. Before we move on, can you quickly remind me about false positives and false negatives? I always mix those up.
Of course. Think of a false positive like a smoke detector going off when you're just toasting bread.
Okay.
It's an alert, but it turns out to be nothing. In security, this could be an intrusion detection system flagging normal traffic as malicious. Too many of these, and security teams start ignoring alerts because most of them are meaningless.
Yeah, it's like the boy who cried wolf. You stop listening even when there's a real threat.
Exactly. A false negative, on the other hand, is like a burglar breaking in and your alarm system doesn't even make a peep. It's a real threat that goes unnoticed, which is dangerous because it gives you a false sense of security.
Like thinking your fortress is impenetrable, but there's a giant hole you never even saw. Scary thought.
It is. That's why you need a balanced approach to security monitoring, tuning your systems to minimize both false positives and false negatives as much as possible.
And that's where continuous monitoring and assessment come in, right? Because security isn't a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process.
You got it. The threat landscape is constantly changing, new vulnerabilities pop up every day, and attackers are always coming up with new tricks. So ongoing risk management means adapting and staying ahead of the game.
It's not a set and forget it situation.
No.
You need to be constantly watching, assessing, and making adjustments to make sure your defenses are still working. But let's be honest, managing security in the cloud can be a lot to handle, especially with so many moving parts.
It can be. But that's where frameworks come in. Think of them as guidebooks, providing a structured approach to risk management and security in the cloud.
So instead of starting from scratch, we can use these proven frameworks to guide our efforts. And I know one of the most popular ones is the NIST cybersecurity framework. Can you give us a rundown of how that works?
Sure, it's a 6-step process that focuses on continuous improvement.
Okay.
It starts with identifying your most critical assets and the risks they face. Then you move on to selecting and implementing the right security controls to mitigate those risks.
It's a very methodical, step-by-step approach to building a solid security foundation.
Exactly. But it's not just linear.
Oh.
It's iterative, meaning you go through those steps over and over,
Right.
constantly assessing your security and making adjustments as needed.
So it's a feedback loop, always gathering information, analyzing it, and using that knowledge to improve your security over time.
Precisely. But even with the best framework, you need a way to track and communicate risks effectively.
Right.
That's where risk visibility and reporting come in.
Okay, and the risk register is a big part of that, right?
Yeah.
It sounds kind of intimidating, like a giant spreadsheet filled with bad news.
Think of it as a central inventory of all the risks your organization faces.
Yeah.
It's a document that lays out each risk,
Okay.
its potential impact, how likely it is to happen, and the mitigation strategies you're using.
Like a risk report card for the whole organization.
Exactly. It helps you keep track of all those potential threats, prioritize them, and see how you're doing in mitigating them.
But creating that risk register is just the first step.
Right.
You also need to communicate that information to the right people. And I can't imagine executives wanting to wade through a massive spreadsheet.
Right.
There has to be a more digestible way to present all that, right?
Absolutely. For high-level reporting, risk matrices or heat maps are common.
Okay.
They visually show risks based on how likely and how impactful they are, so executives can quickly see the most critical ones.
It's like a color-coded dashboard for risk,
Exactly.
highlighting the areas that need the most attention.
Precisely. But where does all this information about risks even come from? Do organizations just make it up?
Right.
No, not at all. Formal risk assessments are a key part,
Okay.
providing a systematic way to identify and analyze potential threats. You can also look at audit findings, both internal and external, to see where security controls might be weak. And increasingly, organizations are using threat intelligence.
Threat intelligence. Sounds kind of like spy movie.
I know, right? But it's essentially shared knowledge about cyber threats and vulnerabilities.
Gotcha.
Organizations can buy threat intelligence feeds from vendors or join sharing communities where they swap information about attacks they've seen.
Like a neighborhood watch for cybersecurity.
Yeah,
Everyone shares info about suspicious activity to protect the whole community.
exactly. By pooling that knowledge, organizations get a better picture of the threats they face and can take steps to defend themselves.
Makes sense. It's like having a network of security experts all working together to stay ahead of the bad guys. But even with the best threat intelligence and risk management, we can't forget about the people involved. All the tech and policies in the world won't matter if our employees aren't on board.
So true. The human element is often the weakest link.
Right.
People make mistakes, fall for phishing scams, use bad passwords, sometimes even intentionally bypass security controls.
So how do we tackle that? How do we make sure our employees are security aware and actually helping to create a secure cloud environment?
Security awareness training is key.
Right.
You've got to educate your employees about the risks, the policies, the best practices for using the cloud securely. But it's not just about telling them what not to do. It's
No.
about explaining why it matters, make it relevant to their work, and empower them to be part of the solution.
Instead of just a lecture about password complexity, you explain how a weak password could lead to compromised accounts and sensitive data being exposed.
Right.
Make it real, make it personal, make it matter to their everyday work.
Exactly. And it's not just one-time training either.
Right.
Security threats are constantly evolving, so your training has to keep up. Regular refresher courses, phishing simulations, security awareness campaigns, all those things help keep security top of mind.
It's about creating a culture of security where everyone gets their role in protecting the organization's data. It's everyone's job, from the CEO to the intern.
Absolutely. Security is a team effort, and everyone needs to contribute to that secure cloud environment. We can't assume people will automatically do the right thing. We have to give them the knowledge, the tools, and the support to make secure decisions.
That leads us perfectly into data security roles. It's one thing to have policies and training, but you need people directly responsible for protecting data in the cloud. So let's break down who's involved and what they do.
A common model uses a three-tiered approach: data owner, data steward, and data custodian.
Okay.
Each role has distinct responsibilities, and they work together to make sure data is protected and used properly.
It's like a data protection dream team,
Exactly.
each member with a crucial role in safeguarding the organization's information.
The data owner is the one who calls the shots.
Okay.
It's a senior-level executive who's ultimately responsible for the data. They set the policies, the guidelines, the overall data security strategy.
Like the CEO of data protection,
Yes.
setting the vision and direction.
Exactly. But they don't get bogged down in the day-to-day operations. That's where the data steward comes in.
Gotcha.
They're responsible for actually implementing the data owner's policies, making sure everything runs smoothly.
The COO of data protection, making sure the policies are put into action.
Exactly. And then you have the data custodian.
Okay, what about them? What's their role on this dream team?
The data custodian is the one handling the data directly,
Okay.
storing it, processing it, backing it up, and so on. Often an IT role system, admins, database admins, cloud engineers.
They're the hands-on team, the ones actually implementing those security controls and protecting data day in and day out.
Precisely. And all three roles, they have to work closely together to make sure data is protected effectively.
Gotcha.
They need to communicate clearly, understand each other's roles, and collaborate to achieve that common goal: protecting the organization's valuable data.
It's a team effort, just like every other aspect of cloud security. And we're just scratching the surface. We've got so much more to cover, so stay tuned for the next part of this deep dives, where we'll go even deeper into essential cloud security concepts.
That's right, lots more ground to cover, including data privacy, those legal and regulatory hurdles, and incident response.
If you're finding this helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with your fellow CCSP exam preppers. We're all in this together, and we want to help you succeed.
See you in part 2. Welcome back to our Cloud Security Deep Dive, where we're unpacking everything you need to know for that CCSP exam.
We've already covered some serious ground: risk management, security controls, and those key data security roles.
Right.
But now let's dive into a topic that's top of mind for everyone in the cloud world: data security and privacy.
It's a big deal for a reason. So much sensitive stuff is stored in the cloud now. Getting this right is crucial. And it's not just one thing, it's a whole multifaceted challenge.
It is, yeah. Saying data security is kind of like saying healthy living.
Yeah.
It's a huge umbrella term.
Right.
Where do we even begin to unpack that?
A good place to start is understanding the core components of data security:
Yeah.
confidentiality, integrity, and availability, often called the CIA triad.
The CIA triad sounds kind of cloak and dagger,
Right.
but it's really about protecting data from all angles, right?
Absolutely. Confidentiality means preventing unauthorized access.
Okay.
Think encryption, tight access controls, making sure data is stored securely.
Locking it down tight.
Yep.
Then there's integrity. That's
Integrity.
making sure the data hasn't been messed with, altered in any way.
Precisely. Data validation checks, things like digital signatures, and constant monitoring for any unauthorized changes. It's about ensuring the data is trustworthy.
Like making sure no one's sneaking into your bank account and changing your balance without you knowing.
Exactly.
What about availability then?
Availability is all about ensuring the data is accessible to the right people at the right time.
Okay.
Think robust backups, well-tested disaster recovery plans, systems designed with redundancy.
So preventing data loss and keeping those business operations running smoothly.
Precisely.
I'm seeing how these three pieces, confidentiality, integrity, availability, work together. But these principles become even more critical in the cloud because we're entrusting our data to someone else.
You're spot on. And that's where due diligence comes in.
Right.
Before handing your data over to a cloud provider, you've got to thoroughly check them out. Their security practices, compliance with regulations, their history with data breaches.
It's like choosing a babysitter for your data.
Yeah.
You wouldn't just pick anyone.
Right.
You want someone trustworthy, responsible, with a good track record.
Exactly. And even with a great provider, you can't just forget about it. You still need strong security on your end, encrypt sensitive data, train your employees on best practices.
It's a partnership, not a free pass.
Absolutely. You share the responsibility, but you have to stay proactive. And that brings us to data privacy, which is closely linked to data security, but not exactly the same.
Yeah, it's like they're cousins or something.
That's a good way to put it. Data security is the bodyguard, protecting data from unauthorized access and threats. Data privacy is more like the ethical guide, ensuring data is used appropriately and responsibly.
So respecting people's rights and expectations about their personal information.
Exactly. And this has become even more important with regulations like GDPR and CCPA taking center stage.
They've definitely raised the bar, giving individuals more control over their data.
Right.
Organizations need to be aware of these regulations, not just to avoid legal trouble, but to build trust with their users.
Right. It's not just about checking boxes. It's about doing the right thing. So what are some key principles of data privacy that organizations should focus on?
Yeah, what are those?
Transparency is huge. Individuals have the right to know what data is collected about them, how it's used, who it's shared with. No more hiding behind those long, confusing privacy policies.
Yeah, no more of that.
It's about being upfront and honest.
Right. If someone's collecting data about me, I want to know why and what they're doing with it.
Exactly.
Makes sense. What else?
Purpose limitation is key.
Yeah.
Data should only be collected for specific, legitimate reasons and not used for anything else without clear consent. No hoarding data just in case. It's about respect and intentionality.
And data minimalism is important too, right? Collect only what's absolutely necessary and get rid of it when you don't need it anymore, like decluttering your digital life.
Exactly. And all these principles need to be considered when it comes to cloud security. If you're storing data in the cloud, you need to make sure your provider aligns with your data privacy values and complies with those regulations.
Finding a provider you can trust and then taking steps to protect your data within that cloud environment.
Precisely.
A two-pronged approach. Choosing the right partner and then setting up those safeguards.
Exactly. Now, we've mentioned GDPR a few times,
We have.
but it's so important in the data privacy world that it deserves a closer look.
It really does. It's changed the game for how organizations think about data privacy. For those who might not be totally familiar with GDPR, can you give us a crash course on what it is and why it matters so much for cloud security?
Think of GDPR as the gold standard for data protection.
Okay.
It applies to any organization that processes personal data of individuals in the EU, regardless of where that organization is actually based.
So even if a company is in the US with no office in Europe, they still need to comply with GDPR if they're handling data from EU citizens.
That's right. And it's not just about checking boxes. It's about a privacy by design approach,
Okay.
baking privacy considerations into every step of your data processing, from the initial design to how you manage data throughout its life cycle.
So it's not just a legal hurdle, it's a fundamental change in how organizations approach data privacy. But for those moving to the cloud, what are some specific things they need to do to meet those GDPR requirements?
First, they need a lawful basis for processing personal data in the first place. This could be consent from the individual, a contractual obligation, a legal requirement, or a legitimate interest.
So no more collecting data just because.
Mm-hmm.
You need a valid reason, and you have to be transparent about it.
Exactly. They also need to put in place appropriate security measures, technical and organizational, to protect that data. Encryption, access controls, data masking, regular security testing, all those crucial controls we talked about earlier.
So all those security measures are essential for GDPR compliance too.
Absolutely. And transparency is key.
Great.
Organizations need to be upfront about how that data is being processed. Clear privacy notices, informing individuals of their rights, and responding to their requests quickly and thoroughly.
No more burying that info in pages of legal jargon.
Right.
It's about clear communication and respecting those rights.
Exactly. And if a breach does happen, organizations need a plan to notify affected individuals and the authorities quickly and efficiently.
So not just preventing breaches, but having a solid incident response plan ready.
Right. GDPR is comprehensive and it has teeth. Organizations can face big fines for non-compliance, but it's also about respecting those privacy rights and building trust with customers, which is essential in today's world.
Trust is everything, and it's about doing what's right, which brings us nicely to legal and regulatory issues in cloud security. GDPR is just one piece. There are tons of other laws and regulations that organizations need to be aware of when operating in the cloud.
Absolutely. It's a complex and constantly changing landscape.
It is.
Staying informed is critical. And remember, these regulations often have specific implications for your approach to cloud security. It's not one size fits all.
Right. Different industries have different regulations they need to follow. So beyond GDPR, what are some of the key regulations organizations should be aware of?
In the U.S., you've got IPEA, protecting health information.
Right.
Then there's GLBA for financial institutions, safeguarding customer financial data. And of course, PCI DSS, setting security standards for anyone handling credit card transactions.
It's a lot to keep up with, especially for global organizations operating in multiple countries. It can be a real headache navigating all those different regulations.
It can be. A good place to start is developing a solid information security policy.
Yeah.
This is like your organization's security constitution,
Gotcha.
outlining your commitments to security and privacy and making sure it aligns with all those laws and regulations.
Your North Star for security, guiding your decisions and actions.
Exactly. But even with a strong policy, actually managing all those compliance efforts can be overwhelming. Are there any tools or frameworks that can help?
There must be.
Absolutely. A GRC framework, governance, risk, and compliance, can be a lifesaver.
Okay.
Think of it as a structured way to manage all your governance, risk, and compliance activities centrally.
GRC sounds like alphabet soup.
I know, right?
But it's essentially about streamlining compliance, reducing risk, improving your overall security, right?
Exactly. It's like having a project manager for security and compliance, keeping you organized, on track, and aligned with all those requirements.
That sounds incredibly helpful. But even with the best technology, policies, and frameworks, there's still that human element we can't ignore.
You're absolutely right. We can't forget about the people involved. Human error, it's one of the biggest security risks out there. People clicking phishing links, using weak passwords, falling for social engineering scams. It's a constant battle.
So how do we address that in the cloud? How do we ensure our employees are security aware and actually contributing to a safer environment?
Security awareness training is crucial.
Right, we talked about that before.
You've got to educate those employees about the risks, the policies, best practices for secure cloud usage. But it's not just about telling them what not to do.
Right.
It's about explaining WHY. It's important.
Yeah.
Make it engaging, relatable, and relevant to their daily work.
Instead of just lecturing about password complexity, explain how a weak password could lead to their account being compromised.
Exactly.
And sensitive data being exposed. Make it real, make it personal, connect it to what they do every day.
Exactly. And it's not a one-time thing.
Right.
Security threats are always evolving, so your training needs to keep up. Regular refresher courses, phishing simulations, ongoing awareness campaigns, these are key to keeping security top of mind.
It's about building a culture of security,
Yeah.
where everyone understands they play a role in protecting the organization's data.
Right.
It's not just IT's job, it's everyone's, from the top down.
Absolutely. Security is a team effort, and everyone needs to be a part of that secure cloud environment. We can't just assume they'll do the right thing. We need to empower them with the knowledge, tools, and support to make those secure decisions.
That brings us to incident response.
All right.
No matter how good your security is, breaches can and do happen. So having that well-defined incident response plan is crucial.
It is, because it's not a matter of if, but when.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Having a solid plan is like having that fire extinguisher ready to go. You hope you'll never use it, but you'd better be prepared if that alarm goes off.
Exactly. A good incident response plan outlines how you'll identify, contain, and eradicate those threats, how you'll recover, and how you'll learn from the experience to prevent it from happening again.
It's a playbook for those security emergencies. What are the key elements of a good plan? Where do you even begin?
You need a clear process for identifying and reporting security incidents.
Okay.
Who do people contact if they suspect something's wrong? How do you escalate those incidents to the right people quickly?
That's like a 9/11 system for security issues.
Exactly.
Making sure those alerts get to the right people immediately.
You also need a dedicated team, trained and ready to respond.
Okay.
This could involve IT, security analysts, legal, even PR. Different skills coming together to tackle the problem from all sides.
It's a multidisciplinary team, each person playing a crucial part in containing and mitigating the damage. But it's not just about reacting in the moment, right? There's a lot of preparation involved to ensure a smooth and effective response.
You're right. You need clear procedures for containing and eliminating threats, recovering systems and data, and learning from the incident to prevent it from happening again, being proactive as well as reactive.
So it's not just about putting out the fire, it's about understanding how it started and preventing future fires. That's where documentation comes in, right? Keeping track of everything so you can analyze it later and improve your processes.
Absolutely. Document everything, the incident itself, the steps taken to respond, and those lessons learned. This helps you refine your plan over time and build a stronger, more resilient security posture.
Like a detailed after-action report, helping you improve your strategies and prepare for future incidents.
Exactly. And don't forget to test your plan regularly. You don't want to wait for a real incident to find out your plan has flaws or your team isn't prepared.
So run those fire drills, put your team through their paces, and make sure everyone knows what to do when those alarms go off.
Exactly.
But let's be real, incident response can be incredibly stressful. It's high pressure. The stakes are high. Do you have any advice for our listeners on how to stay calm and focused when dealing with a security incident?
Great question. Incident response can be super stressful, but remember, panicking won't help anyone. Take a deep breath, assess the situation, and follow your plan.
It's like that saying, under pressure, you don't rise to the occasion, you sink to the level of your training.
Exactly.
If you prepared well and practiced, you'll be much better equipped to handle that pressure when a real incident happens.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to ask for help. There are lots of resources like consultants, security vendors, even law enforcement. You don't have to go it alone.
It's like having a support network for security emergencies, knowing who to call when you need expert help.
Exactly. And remember, every incident, no matter how small, is a chance to learn and improve. Analyze what happened, find those weaknesses in your defenses, and update your plan accordingly. You can come out of an incident stronger and more resilient.
Turn those security lemons into lemonade. Well, I think we've covered a lot today. Data privacy, legal and regulatory issues, and incident response.
We have.
Yeah, intense stuff. But hopefully our listeners are feeling more confident about these topics for the CCSP exam.
Yeah, definitely. Anything else you want to add before we move on to other areas of cloud security?
I think we hit the key points, but this is just the beginning.
It is.
The CCSP exam is comprehensive. There's always more to learn.
Always.
Keep studying, stay curious, and really explore those topics that interest you.
Great advice. And hey, if you're enjoying this deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your fellow CCSP preppers out there.
Absolutely. We're all in this together. We'll be back soon with part 3, where we'll continue our exploration of cloud security. Until then, happy studying. All right, cloud security fans, welcome back. Ready for the final stretch of our CCSP exam prep deep dive.
Absolutely. We've tackled risk, privacy, incident response, and now we're getting to the core of it all, the foundation cloud infrastructure.
Like, you can't build a secure castle on shaky ground.
Right.
So let's break down those core components of cloud infrastructure.
Think of it like a well-organized building.
Yeah.
At the bottom, you've got the physical infrastructure, the servers, the networking gear, the storage, all the tangible stuff that powers the cloud.
Right, the actual hardware that makes the cloud magic happen.
It's like the foundation and the building blocks.
But it's not just about stacking servers in a data center, right? There's a lot more to it than that.
Of course. On top of that physical layer, we have the virtualization layer.
Okay.
This is what lets us run multiple virtual machines on one physical server, making the cloud so efficient and scalable.
Virtualization, it's like turning one server into a whole digital apartment complex.
Exactly.
Each virtual machine is a separate unit.
And then above that, you have the cloud management platform.
Right.
The control center, providing the tools and interfaces for managing all those cloud resources.
So it's like the building superintendent keeping things running smoothly, handling maintenance, making sure everyone has the resources they need.
Perfect analogy. And finally, at the top, we have the applications and services that users actually interact with.
Got it. So it's layered, with each layer depending on the one below it. But where does security fit in? Is it just sprinkled on top, or is it built into each layer?
Security has to be woven into every single layer. It's not an afterthought. It's a fundamental part from the very beginning.
Okay, so starting with that physical layer, those servers and networking equipment, what kind of security are we talking about? It's not just about walking the doors to the data center, right?
Right. Physical security is crucial, absolutely. Strict access controls, surveillance systems, environmental controls to protect against things like fire or flood.
Making sure those servers are treated like VIPs.
Exactly.
Multiple layers of protection.
It's about creating a secure perimeter to protect those valuable assets.
But what about the virtualization layer? How do we secure those virtual machines and the hypervisor that manages them?
That's a critical layer because if that hypervisor is compromised, an attacker could get access to multiple virtual machines.
Right, that would be bad.
We need to harden the hypervisor, make it as tough to crack as possible.
Okay.
And we need to isolate the virtual machines from each other, preventing an attacker from hopping between them.
It's like putting firewalls between those virtual apartments.
Exactly.
Preventing a fire in one unit from spreading to the whole building.
Right. And of course, continuous monitoring is essential at this layer too.
Got to keep an eye on things.
Looking for any suspicious activity that might signal a problem.
So those security cameras and motion detectors in our virtual building, always watching.
Exactly. Now, the cloud management platform, that's a prime target for attackers.
Right, because it gives them access to so much.
It's the control center for the whole cloud environment.
Yeah.
Securing it is absolutely critical. Secure those management interfaces, implement strong access controls, and constantly monitor for unauthorized changes.
Like having a security detail guarding the control panel.
Yes.
Making sure no one's messing with the settings or getting access to sensitive information.
Precisely. And then there's the top layer, those applications and services running in the cloud.
Right.
Securing those involves secure coding practices, vulnerability scanning, and application-level access controls.
Making sure those tenants in our virtual apartment building are following the rules and not leaving their doors unlocked.
Exactly. And remember, security isn't just about tech. It's people and processes, too.
Right, it's all connected.
You need skilled security professionals managing your infrastructure and clear policies and procedures in place.
That holistic approach we keep talking about.
Absolutely. Tech, people, processes, all working together.
Now let's dive into some cloud-specific security controls. We talked about controls in general earlier, but what are some examples that are particularly important in the cloud?
Well, access control is always a big one.
Right, making sure only the right people can get in.
Exactly. Only authorized users should be able to access those cloud resources, and you need to control what they can do once they're in. That's where IAM comes in.
IAM, Identity and Access Management. It's like the bouncer and the security guard, all in one.
I like that analogy.
Checking IDs at the door and then making sure people are only going where they're allowed.
IAM is all about managing user identities and permissions in the cloud. It's authentication, authorization, and auditing.
So a complete system for controlling access.
Exactly.
But in the cloud, this often means working with cloud-based identity providers.
Right, you got it. Cloud providers have their own IAM services, like Azure Active Directory or AWS IAM,
Okay.
which can be integrated with your existing systems or used on their own.
So it's like outsourcing your security guard service to the cloud provider.
In a way, yes.
Letting them handle the authentication and authorization for you.
It can be very effective, especially in large, complex environments.
Makes sense. But IAM is just one part of the security puzzle. What other essential cloud security controls should we be thinking about?
Encryption, for sure.
Right, protecting data in transit and at rest.
Absolutely. You want to make sure your data is safe from prying eyes, whether it's moving over the network or just stored in a cloud storage bucket.
Like putting your data in a locked briefcase before sending it through the mail, and then
Exactly.
keeping it in a secure vault at its destination.
Perfect analogy. And then there's login and monitoring.
Those security cameras and motion detectors in our virtual building.
Exactly. We need to see what's happening in our cloud environment all the time. Tools like intrusion detection systems, SIEM tools, even just regular log analysis.
So collecting data, analyzing it for anything suspicious, and taking action if something seems off.
Right. And don't forget vulnerability management and penetration testing.
Right, finding and fixing weaknesses before the bad guys can exploit them.
Exactly. It's like hiring ethical hackers to try to break into your system and then using that information to strengthen your defenses.
Like giving your security system a real-world test,
Exactly.
making sure it can stand up to determined attackers.
And of course, we can't forget incident response. Breaches happen, so having a solid plan is like having that emergency exit strategy ready.
It's like that fire escape route we talked about before, just in case things go wrong.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And incident response in the cloud has its own unique challenges, so having a cloud-specific plan is essential.
Right, because a cloud incident might involve multiple parties, including the cloud provider.
Right.
Understanding those shared responsibilities is key.
Absolutely. And just like any security control, incident response is an ongoing process.
You have to adapt and evolve as new threats emerge.
Exactly. Now, one last area I want to touch on. Cloud storage.
Okay?
It's super popular, but it comes with its own security challenges.
It does. Cloud storage is convenient, but it's also a tempting target for attackers. Data breaches involving cloud storage are all too common, so knowing how to secure those storage buckets is crucial.
Absolutely. So how do we safeguard our data in the cloud? What are the key steps?
What are those?
Encryption is essential, both in transit and at rest, protecting your data from unauthorized access at every stage.
Like putting that data in a secure container before sending it to the cloud,
Exactly.
and then keeping that container locked up tight while it's being stored.
Perfect. And then there's access control.
Right, making sure only the right people can get in.
You need to manage who has access to your cloud storage and what level of access they have. IAM plays a key role here.
Like having a security guard at the entrance, checking credentials carefully.
Right. And then we have data retention and deletion.
Okay.
You need clear policies for how long you'll keep data in the cloud and how you'll securely delete it when you're done with it. It's not just about storing it safely, it's about managing the entire life cycle.
Like spring cleaning for your cloud storage.
Exactly.
Get rid of the clutter and keep only what you need. But sometimes those retention policies are set by regulations, right?
That's right. Regulations like GDPR or IPAR might require you to keep data for specific periods of time.
So understanding those legal and compliance obligations is important.
It is.
Security and compliance, they go hand in hand, especially in the cloud.
Absolutely. And then there's data validation.
Right.
Making sure that the data going into your cloud storage is accurate, complete, and hasn't been tampered with, like a quality control check before it even enters the cloud.
So ensuring data integrity right from the start.
Exactly. But even with all these measures in place, you still need to be vigilant. That's where monitoring comes in.
Right, those security cameras and motion sensors in our virtual storage facility.
You got it. Watching for unauthorized access attempts, unusual data transfers, changes to permissions, anything that could signal a problem.
So keeping an eye out for any signs of trouble.
Exactly. And remember, cloud storage security is a shared responsibility.
Right, that shared responsibility model again.
Your provider secures the underlying infrastructure, but you're responsible for your own data and applications.
It's a partnership, not a free pass.
Exactly. And that partnership applies to all of cloud security. Understanding those shared responsibilities, communicating clearly, and working together to create a secure and resilient cloud environment.
Well, I think we've covered a ton of ground in this deep dive, from risk management and security controls to data privacy, incident response, and the ins and outs of cloud infrastructure and storage.
We've
hit those essential concepts you'll need for the CCSP exam.
It's just the tip of the iceberg, but hopefully it's a solid foundation.
Definitely.
A starting point for our listeners to explore these topics even further. The CCSP exam is challenging, but it's worth it.
It is.
And we believe that with hard work and dedication, you can all achieve your goals.
Absolutely. And if you found this deep dive helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your fellow CCSP exam preppers out there.
Right, we're all in this together.
We'll be back soon with more cloud security insights. Until then, happy studying and stay secure.